Hey there, it's Jackie, and welcome to Chapter 2 of Codédex's UI UX design course. Today we will be practicing wireframing in Figma for our fictional pet sitting app. So again, wireframing is the process of making mockups of screens in our app that convey the intended layout and functionality of the app. So I'm going to start by talking about a couple tools in Figma that make wireframing an easier process. First, let's create a frame. So I'm going to press F on my keyboard, and you notice in the right-hand panel, you can see a list of devices under the Frame tab. In this case, we are designing a mobile app, so we're going to want to choose one of the frames under Phone, and I'm going to choose iPhone 17 to start with. So that gives us a nice phone-shaped frame right in the middle of our Figma workspace. I'm going to call this sign-in screen. So in this video, we're just going to show you the wireframing process for one screen to start off with. In the future, we will design more of our app. The next tool that I want to take some time to explore is components. I'm going to create a button on the screen just as if I'm designing this normally. I'm going to create a frame that's a nice rectangle shape. Maybe I'll give it a height of 60 pixels instead. And I will give it a background fill just so we can see it. So buttons usually have text in the middle, so I'm going to use the T key to create some text, and I'm going to call this button text. Then I will adjust the resizing property of the text box to be auto width, so it's nice and snug, and maybe use these alignment tools to get the text in the center. So cool, we have a very simple button. And, it's the right size of a button on our screen. And to visualize it a little bit better, I'm going to drag it off of the sign-in screen frame. So I'm going to try turning this button into a component. So I'm going to right-click on this and say Create Component. And you can see that once it has this purple outline and this diamond symbol, it's turned into a component. I'm going to make sure to rename this from frame 1 to button. So what is powerful about components is that you can create copies of these buttons. So I press Control-C, Control-V on my keyboard, and this creates a duplicate version of this button. But you can see now in the layers panel that the diamond is outlined instead of filled in. So this is called the instance of our main component. The main component is what we created before. And we can use this anywhere in our design and create multiple copies if we want to. And the key thing to know about main components and their instances is that you can change anything about the main component and it will reflect in the instances. So this is really handy when wireframing and just creating designs in general, because you don't want to create the same button 100 times and then realize you want to change something about it and then change it 100 times. Components allow you to create the button once and then reuse that component anywhere in the design, and it'll always reflect the changes that you make to the main component. The only caveat is if you change some aspect of the instance, so I'm going to call this new text. If you override something in an instance, changes to the main component are not going to reflect in that instance. So you can see that this ASDF text is showing up in the instances that I have not made custom additions to, but it hasn't affected this one that says new text. So I'm going to delete these instances and go back to my main component and turn it back into a dark gray. Another thing that you can do with components is create variants of them. So say I have this button, but I also want a version that has an outlined style. I can go and click on the button and press Properties, and you can see that there's this drop down and I can click Variant. So this is going to create this new property called Property 1, and I'm going to rename that to Style because I want two styles. One is outline and one is solid. So this is our solid button. So I'm going to change default to solid. And you can also see that there's a little plus sign now in the component. I'm going to click that and it's going to create it. I'm going to just drag it to not overlap so much. And I'm going to call this style outline. So right now it looks pretty similar to our original button, but I can use the stroke and change the fill of the button and change the text color. So it is a new style. So that looks a little thick, so I'm just gonna change it to 2 pixels stroke. And there you have our button that has 2 styles, one solid and outline. And another thing to note is that you can also layer different properties on top of each other. So I'm just gonna drag this purple line so it's more to work with. And I'm gonna copy these 2 buttons and paste them. Another thing I can do is add a new variant. And besides style, I also want to create versions of the button for the state of the button. So when you have a button in a UI, it looks different when you press it versus when you leave it alone. So I'm just going to call this state. And I'm going to make sure that the original buttons have the state of default and the new buttons have the state of press. And I'm just going to change the style a little bit to show that these buttons look differently when you press on them. And there you have our button component. Oh, one thing to note is that when I created those new variants, it gave these other 2 buttons, the style 3 and style 4, but I want to call this solid and I want to call this outline. So you have these 4 variants of buttons that differ between style and state, and these can be used in our design now. When you want to use a component you made, you can go into the Assets tab, click Create it in this file, and find the component you want, in this case button, and then drag it onto your design. So here you can see that you have these really handy toggles that allow it to change between any of the variants that you declared while making the component. And I'm going to call this first button Sign In. And I'm going to copy and paste it and call this one Sign Up, just to give people multiple options in the sign-in screen if they have an account or if they don't. And I'm going to change this one to outline to give some differentiation. So here we have a starting point for a very simple sign-in page. And one thing that I want to also add is a set of 2 text inputs, one for username and password. So I'm going to create a component for a text input in a very similar way to the way that I made these button components. And I'll fast forward a little bit as I make it because the process is pretty similar. So here we have a text input component that's pretty simple. It has a piece of text for the label for the input, and it also has this frame, which is where you will type the text into if this were on the UI. So one thing I want to do with here is create also some new variants here because I think it's helpful to visualize when the input is full versus when it's empty. So I'm going to create a new property and call it state as well, create a new variant, and I'm going to call the first one I made empty and the second one I made filled. And then I'm going to make sure that the filled one has some filler text within the frame. And I'm just going to center the text, and I'm left aligning it because that makes more sense for text input. So here we have our second component, text input, and we can add it to our design as well. And I'm going to create two versions of this, one for username, one for password. And arrange them on the screen. And the last thing I want to add to this is some little branding for our pet sitting app. Right now, it's pretty plain. I'm just going to imagine that our app is called Fetch, but it could be anything you want. I'm going to make this text a little bit bolder and bigger. And I'm going to add a little tagline underneath as well. Find a pet sitter today. So this is our very simple sign-in screen wireframe, but in this stage, simple is good. It's just a matter of showing the basic layout for your screens and what the screen is intended to do. So while doing lo-fi wireframing, you do not need to sweat the visual details too much. It is more about blocking out the main layout and functionality of your app. So now try this process out for yourself. Try creating a sign-in screen yourself in Figma by creating a frame, some components, and using those components for the sign-in screen. Don't worry about designing more of the app just yet. We'll get to that in the next exercise. Happy designing!